and know ourselves, we don't know one another. Look, when I see you, I know who I'm looking at. There's no that I don't love. I may never have met you before, but when I see you, I know who I'm looking at. And I know that I have a duty by you. And you will never find me disrespecting any of you because I know who you are. It makes no difference how young or how old. You are from Allah. Listen now. And therefore, the essence of you is Him. I'm going to say that again. You are from Allah. Therefore, the essence of you is Him. So you are not only able to become a human being, but if you evolve properly, you can become an expression of, a manifestation of the divine characteristics of God Himself. Listen. So the Bible says, how can you love God whom you have never seen and hate your brother whom you see every day? Let's not just say it. Let's understand it more. Listen, how can you love God whom you've never seen and hate your brother whom you see every day? Now, the principal words in this is God and brother. And you have love and hate. Two opposites. But God and brother are not opposite. God and brother are similar, but you love one that you've never seen and hate the other whom you see every day. Well, now what Allah is saying to us is when you hate your brother, in whom is the essence of God, you are hating God. So the question is asked, how can you love God whom you've never seen and hate your brother in whom God is? And you see Him every day. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, every time I see a black man, I'm looking at God. You are now tuned in to the Respect for Life radio broadcast with your host, Brother Keith Muhammad. This program is dedicated to the unity and upliftment of the Black community. Our goal is to change the world, one mind at a time. Peace and blessings. Welcome, everyone, once again to the Respect for Life radio broadcast. I'm your host, Brother Keith Muhammad, coming to you live via cmpradio.net. I'm here right now at this moment with our good brother, Jean-Pierre, founder, CEO of this great radio station, Community Soldier, for the cause of uplifting the Black community, cultivating mature positivity. Assalamu alaikum, good brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
How are
brother.
you,
Good
brother?
to see
you. Doing pretty good?
Yeah, man, I'm good. I'm maintained, man. I'm definitely maintained.
Yes, sir. Well, brother, it's a pleasure and an honor once again. We missed a couple of weeks, but I'm anxious and excited to talk to those who will be viewing now live and via the rebroadcast as it's posted up on cmpradio.net. A lot is going on in the last several weeks.
So much going on in the world, nationally, locally, internationally. It's really just a time. The Bible said it like this: "There's a time like there never was before. Since there was a nation in a time." The Holy Quran talks about the time, and it says, "Surely man is in loss by the time, except those who believe and do good, who enjoin one another to truth and enjoin one another to patience." And we here at the Respect for Life program, our mantra is, whoever prescribes the diameter of your thinking controls the circumference of your activity. And the activity that is pervasive on the planet today, the activity going on in Chester, going on in Philadelphia, going on across the nation and the world, is that which is generated from the dominant thought process of the people. So our job, our mission, our desire, our goal is to just make us think along a different line or a different current, to entertain a different thought pattern, that we may change the behavior of our personal life, that we may impact our families, impact our community, and as your station is mission to do, cultivate a mature, positive mindset toward making substantive changes in our lives and the lives of our people. So we're at it once again here on Respect for Life. The first part of our program, of course, we like to dedicate to current events and news. And like I said, there's a lot going on in the news. So there's so much to choose from. But there are two things I wanted to just note in the Final Call news segment. The first is from the Final Call newspaper. As I always say, it's important for us to seek out independent news sources. It's important to understand that much of the media, if not all, but most of the media is corporate controlled, meaning that whoever pays the piper dictates the tune. So if somebody's allowing you to continue, and print media is in very, very dire straits right now with the advent of the internet and everything going digital. Printed newspapers are really going the way of the so-called dinosaurs, if you believe in that. But the key thing is, and one thing President Trump and all the lies that he has told for the almost 4 years he's been in office now, one thing that he has stated that is the truth, he talks a lot about fake news. And it's not an unbiased, it's not a news media that seeks out truth, that does independent reporting on a large scale to get to the facts and to present them in an unbiased way. All you need to do is watch the major cable news broadcasts, and you see the slant. You see the scripted presentation of what they call news. So we want to be able to seek sources, and I'm saying this because the Final Call newspaper has little to no advertising in it. The only thing you will see advertised are certain books, certain lectures that are produced, written, or spoken by those that are members of the Nation of Islam. And it's an independent news source, and it's dedicated to bringing truth and information to the entire world, but certainly the Black community. So the Final Call news segment, we bring the news that you hear about often, but we bring it from a perspective of independent news source. So in the current edition of the Final Call newspaper that you can get this Saturday, this week, it don't have to be Saturday if you see the brothers on the street, or you can log in to finalcall.com and get the news and information and take out a subscription to the digital edition of the Final Call newspaper if you want to make sure you get it in your email each and every Tuesday. But in the current edition of the Final Call, there's an article dealing with the unraveling of America. And if you watched the debate, if you want to call it that, from last week, if you have been watching the current news events surrounding President Trump and his wife and his cabinet members and various individuals around him and the contracting of the COVID-19 virus, if you're watching just the entire scene of the election, if you're watching the economy, if you're watching the handling of the coronavirus for since March now, going on nearly 8 months, if you're just studying and paying attention with a open mind to what's happening to this great nation called America, you see it unraveling. You see it disintegrate right before our eyes. And we have talked about it several times on our program. All you need to do is look at the vital signs of a nation, and you can see what kind of condition it's in. Don't worry about how the president and others will keep telling us this is the greatest nation in the world, but it's not leading in any of the great statistics of the world, but leading in the negative statistics of the world. Education, the health condition of the citizens, the social order, the economic order, all of it is in shambles in America. The only thing you can say America is truly the greatest in the world in is her military. Uh, but anyway, the unraveling of America is taking place before our eyes. And in the current edition of the Final Call newspaper, there's an article. I just wanted to touch on a few things from it and then go to another news story that you haven't heard a lot about. I had to find it on the internet. I didn't really get it um, from the major news sources, although today you get a few articles about it, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But in the current edition of the Final Call, in an article dealing with chaos and confusion, the fall of America amid divine guidance. These are words from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I wanted to share these words and have us just look through the prism, because if we are believers in God, and most people that I know believe in some divine being, whether we call it the ancestors, whether we call it Yahweh, Jehovah, God the Father, Allah, we in general, most of the planet really believes, whether it's grandfather from our native, as they call them, American brothers and sisters. But my point is, if we believe in a God, if we believe in the ancient stories and prophecies that we find in scriptures that are pertaining to, in particular, the Judeo-Christian and Islamic faiths, Bible and Holy Quran, then we read of God's intervention in the affairs of the human family. We read about his doing and acting actively in the lives of the people, especially when things get out of control. And when we look at what's going on in the world today, we often say it, God help us. Things have never been like this. And some may even question, is there a God at all, based on what we see going on in the world, in our own communities, and maybe in our own personal lives. But America, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad states, is being torn to pieces politically, as Pharaoh's political party was in the days when Jehovah went after the freedom of Israel. So he's comparing and he's showing the similarities, and really has taught us that America is fulfilling the prophecy of ancient Israel, or ancient Egypt, pardon me, and the children of Israel under Pharaoh, and with the key figure in scripture known as Moses coming, and the unraveling of Pharaoh's kingdom. And we see that in scripture. For those who read the Bible or Quran, we know that God brought plagues upon upon Egypt until Pharaoh relented and ultimately let the children of Israel go. Then he had a hardening of his heart and went after them, and ultimately it brought about his demise. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us from a scriptural perspective that America is fulfilling this prophecy and is the modern Egypt, the modern Babylon, the modern Sodom and Gomorrah, all the nations of the old wrapped up in one. And then the minister states in a recent, not too distant message, when you, and this is really from Savior's Day back in February, right before all this nonsense started, the minister, and I can't call it nonsense, all this chaos started, Minister Farrakhan talked on his subject in Detroit, the unraveling of a great nation. When you unravel something, you undo something that's twisted, knitted, or woven into threads. You investigate and solve or explain something complicated. He's given a definition of unraveling or puzzling. The condition of America is puzzling. The world is looking at a country going to hell, and we're witnessing it with a front row seat. And this article goes on to talk about the debacle of a debate. It calls it a dumpster fire on the world stage. And right after that, you have what is dominating the news right now, President Trump and his positive test for COVID-19. But if you watch that debate, I don't know how any of us who watched it, I don't care who we're voting for, could come away from that debate confident in whoever wins the election, that we are in good hands as a nation. So it should have motivated you and I to think about doing for ourselves and getting ourselves in a position to make sure we can solidify a future for ourselves, even in the midst of this craziness and chaos. So we had a dumpster fire of a debate. I don't know how many of us saw it. If you did, I know you were like me, sitting there with my mouth open. My children were looking at this. And Trump and Biden were looking like two children arguing back and forth on the stage, and the moderator like a parent trying to get control of some unruly children. But this is who runs America. This is who the American populace has as a choice, Biden or Trump to be elected. And many are saying, why even participate? And we talked about this a few weeks back. And there's a very passionate argument on both sides about this electoral process. But the point is, let us have our eyes open, our ears open, and let us really understand what we are witnessing. I know it's hard to conceive that America could actually disintegrate in front of our eyes. But just a few decades ago, and I'm old enough to remember when the Soviet Union was right along with America, the greatest power in the world. And we saw in the 80s the unraveling of that nation to where it's no more, and it was broken up into many nations. And now Russia is no longer the key player she used to be as the head of the Soviet Union. The British Empire, they said the sun never set on the British Empire because it ruled so much territory on the planet, no matter where the sun was, because at some point in this hemisphere is dark and on another part of the planet is light. But because the British Empire was so vast, the sun never set on it. So no matter where the sun was, it was shining on somewhere that the British kingdom owned and ruled over. And now today you can hardly find the British or the United Kingdom over there in yours. Just a small, tiny, still has political power and influence, but not what it used to be. The Roman Empire, the great nations of the past, the people in that time never saw the end of that kingdom until it was too late. And right now, we're in the midst of a great fall all around us. And if we are wise, we will do like God commands us: come out of her. Come out of her way mentally. Come out of her way morally and politically and economically, and begin to carve out an existence for ourselves, those who have the desire to escape the fall of America. So get your final call, read that article along with a lot of other articles. The other news story we want to bring up is one concerning our brother Jonathan Price. Now, Jonathan Price's name has not been ringing in the ears of the people, Black people in particular in America, but soon it will, as more and more learn about this story. Now, Jonathan Price is a 31-year-old Black man, and he, living in Wolf City, Texas, was gunned down by a white police officer. And just today, the news broke that this white police officer has been charged with the murder and the fatal shooting of Jonathan Price following a reported disturbance. So the story is that our brother came upon a gas station where there was a domestic disturbance going on. A male and female were engaged in a altercation physically, and he stepped in as a good Samaritan to stop or break up whatever was going on in that fight or that disturbance between the two parties. And subsequently, the police were called. And of course, when the police showed up, and I haven't been able to read in the story what the ethnicity or the color of the two participants that were in the fight, whether they were black and white or white. Jonathan certainly was a black man. And this is a small town, about 1,500 people outside of Dallas, Texas. And when the cops came on the scene, a 22-year-old police officer who has been charged, as we just say, his name is Sean Lucas, he opened fire. First tasing Jonathan, who the witnesses report put his hands up when the officers came on the scene and tried to explain what was going on. And it appears as though there was no reasoning or rationalizing with this officer. He tased him, and then one witness says once his body started to convulse from the taser, they perceived that as a threat, and they unloaded and shot our brother in his chest and his back, and he died as a result of those wounds. So we want to keep our ears and eyes on this. I don't know how many of us knew about this story. Right now, it's hard to get any news other than what's going on with the gentleman in the White House. And I use that term lightly. And President Trump and all the things going on in the fiasco of the election. But this brother was gunned down. It's good that the cop was charged in his murder, and hopefully justice will be served in this small town where our brother lost his life trying to do the right thing. And from all reports, he was an outstanding citizen. He was a one-time college football player, and he was intervening. Family and friends rave about his gentle personality and all. But we keep seeing this over and over and over again. The black man in particular in America and the black woman are an endangered species. And until we put a protection order on our lives and we put value on our life and we begin to protect and respect our life, this will continue to go on until it ultimately comes to really a divine end. So we are going to keep our eyes and ears on this story. We pray for the family and friends of our brother. And it's just another sad, sad story that we know too well. And it's too often the story when it comes to black men and women in America at the hands of law enforcement. And then to go beyond that at the hands of one another, we continue to show no respect for the life of a black person in America. And unfortunately, that's the American way. America began with no respect on the life of black people, making us chattel slaves, counting us as 3/5 of a human being, seeing us as less than human. And we have adopted that mindset. And therefore, we continue the American way as it pertains to black people here in America. So we got to stop, and we have to change the way we think about ourselves and about our people, that we can begin to show respect for life first for ourselves and command it from other people. But until we do that, we'll keep seeing the sad stories like Jonathan Price in Wolf City, Texas. So they arrested him, put up a $1 million bail, and it'll be interesting to see. He's a 22-year-old police officer, so he must be new on the force. They don't have a lot of information about him. But anyway, we'll keep our ears and eyes on that story. So with that, brothers and sisters, the news can be very depressing if you watch it over and over again because it's the same story. But we should be conscious of what's going on, and we should have our eyes and ears to what's happening. But we should be more than that, planning and operating in a collective manner to do something about the conditions that we have the opportunity to change. And that starts with making a change in our personal lives. It starts with having the ability to impact and change our family and our friends with a new way of thinking. And it starts with trying to make a change in our communities. So those are the two things I wanted to bring up from the news. If you saw the Facebook or Instagram post promoting the show today, you know our topic today is something that is controversial to some degree, and we want to talk. And the thought for this show came up, and I've seen this quote online several times, but this past Friday, I believe, as my wife and I were preparing to go out of town, shout out to my wife. We celebrated our 29th anniversary yesterday. And before we prepared to go out of town on that mini vacation, she showed a post and brought up this slogan or this statement that's become somewhat popular among the younger generation. And it says, "We are not our ancestors." And it's stated in a way as though our ancestors were something to be looked down upon or shunned upon, or that they were maybe cowardly and were not willing to stand up to the oppressor. And my wife was very upset and angry as she looked at the statement. And it's something that, as I reflected upon it, it to me reflects a gross ignorance or lack of understanding, and a great measure of disrespect for those who have gone before us, that paved the way and are the foundation of where we are today, good, bad, or indifferent. So we are not our ancestors. What do you think? And some have chimed in already on the post that I posted up a little while ago. But I wanted to hear from those who are viewing, who may have comments about this statement. We are not our ancestors. What do you think? Wa alaikum salam, Sister Tracy. I already know what you think about that. Thank you, Brother Bill, about that statement. But a few people chimed in on the earlier post about the question. And I'll just read a couple comments from my earlier post advertising the show. I know a few brothers chimed in. Bill, you were one of them. Barry Simmons says we don't have the courage of our ancestors. Brother Bill, you said disrespectful. We are our ancestors. Kevin, he didn't have a comment on that. And I think somebody else, I think it was on Twitter, my brother Malik made a comment about it, and I liked his comment. I wanted to read that. I pray every day to show the strength to fight and endure hard times like our ancestors. Blood runs deep. That's from brother Malik, our good brother from the city of Chester. What do you think? Is it disrespectful? You know, from one perspective, I understand the mindset that's speaking and promoting maybe this mindset that we are not our ancestors, but it's because of the narrow and limited view. And I think mainly this statement, and if there's some who are watching who subscribe to this mentality, please let us know and give us your thoughts of why you feel like we are not our ancestors. But to me, from my perspective, from what I can ascertain from it, it appears that it's a statement that is telling our oppressor that we're not going to deal with you maybe the way our ancestors dealt with you from the perspective that some have, that our ancestors maybe laid down and didn't fight back. And I can say this about the younger generation. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stated and has stated over and over again that this generation is the greatest generation we've ever produced. And the reason, my nephew said he's guilty of it. The reason he said that, the minister said, the reason why this generation is so great and they were born to bring about our liberation and freedom is because they lack fear. They lack fear. And one of the biggest tools that our enemy used to keep us under his foot was fear, and is fear to this day. So from that perspective, our younger generation, who's been born and bred and made by God for this time, I believe, they don't have that fear. So yes, they have a mindset like, look, it ain't gonna be me. You're not gonna do this or that to me. But I think the general statement, from a perspective of many of our youth, is one that shows a measure of lack of understanding on some aspects. And I'll just share some thoughts from what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us about our ancestors and what was necessary really for our survival and to produce the current reality that we are in. He teaches us that the very milk of fear was nursed into our babies, in particular the black man, from the breast of their mothers. What does he mean by that? Literally, chemically, you are what you eat. And the reality is that the black man was and is the #1 threat to white world supremacy. And because we are the #1 threat to white supremacy, the enemy knew that and knows that to this day. So we are the #1 target of our enemy, and coming over onto the shores of America in the slave trade, you and I were targeted to make sure we would never, and we did not we, but my brother, and I say we because we are brothers, Brother Wesley Muhammad and a few other brothers, I forget what program it was on. They were doing a show talking about buck breaking and how literally our enemy, just like you break a horse to make it submissive and let you ride it, because a wild horse is not going to submit for you and me to get on there and ride around on it, put a saddle on it. So you got to break a horse in order to make it submissive for you to ride around on it. And literally, as the old saying goes, somebody can't ride your back unless you on your knees. And it was the object and is the object to this day to make the black man in particular submissive to white rule dominance, white supremacy. And because the natural inclination of the male in particular is to fight and defend the life of himself and his family, that's what we had in our ancestors as they encountered our slave, our captors, pardon me, and our enemy. But as a survival technique, in order for a baby to survive that's a male, the mother had to make sure that that male child didn't show too much, masculinity. Make sure that male child was not his natural self, where he was going to fight naturally against his enemy. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, we literally nurtured the fear, the milk of fear from our mother's breast, and mothers will to this day. And we're afraid when our sons go out into the streets, just be quiet and do what they say, because you're concerned. So when you have a mother who is concerned with the life of her child, she is going to train that male in particular to grow up not to make a fuss, not to argue, not to fight, not to present himself as a real threat. Why? So that child can survive. Otherwise, they would be murdered outright. So there was a defense mechanism that really to this day is still practiced. And the younger generation, by God's design, has been bred in a way, reared in a way, not to fear. And therefore, when they see what was literally and is in some of our people fear of our enemy, it turns them off. So I can understand it. But in general, and I'm trying to find the exact comment, it's difficult for me to read the comments on here. Let me see if I can show them. And let me know if it messes up. Oh, that's not it. Your picture. But I'm trying to see the comments here. Maybe if I look on Facebook, I can see them all. Because I saw my nephew Andre chime in about him. He said he was guilty. And if maybe we can put that back up on the screen, because I can't pull it up here so I can read his exact comment. So I understand that perspective. But in general, the statement to me is showing a lack of understanding of aspects. The other thing that contributes to the general, and it also discounts the great history of rebellion and warriors that fought for our liberation and freedom. Of course, the docile, submissive, step and fetch it type character is promoted and pushed as an image of the black man, even to this day on television, in movies. And this is why our brother Chadwick Boseman, who just passed away, and the movie Black Panther was so powerful because it showed not only a black hero, but it showed a whole civilization that was advanced, civilized, and beyond anything that was currently in the world. And it showed black men ruling. It showed strong black men. It showed strong black women. And it changed the paradigm of thought for a lot of people. But the general view and image of black men in the media and in television is to be clowns, to be buffoons, you know what I mean? To be simple-minded, to be fearful, and these type of things. And that's what they want to promote, because they want that image and they want that mindset amongst us as black men. But what I do want to say in a way is that historically, we got to know our ancestors. First, on a literal level, we are our ancestors. Literally, we are made up DNA-wise from our ancestors. And we carry that DNA, so we are the past. And we keep that DNA, we have it in us right now. We are the present. And when we have children, we pass on into the future. So to discount in the state that we are not our ancestors is to really be factually wrong. But in a figurative sense, it's to discount and not understand what our ancestors went through and what was required of them in order to get us to where we are today. And time dictates agenda. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us we were literally bred to be slaves, because you can't make a free man a slave. You can only make him or her a captive. So we are taught of a 64-year hidden history. They tell us we got here in 1619, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, and he read in the Congressional Library in DC, the history of the first slaves being brought to the Western Hemisphere in 1555. And there's a 64-year hidden history from 1555 to 1619, where they brought our forefathers, our ancestors here, and they bred them and took the children away from the parents in order to raise the children to be what they wanted them to be, to shape their mind, to force them or to engineer them into a docile slave, because if you know freedom, you'll never accept slavery. You may submit, but you'll always be plotting. If you watch the movie Roots, you saw Kunta Kinte, who knew what freedom was, so he was always at least trying to run away. But if you can take a baby from birth, separate it from its parent, and train it up in the way you want it to go, the Bible says, train a child up in the way it should go, and when it's old, it won't depart. But if the devil does that in his mindset, if our enemy takes a child, raise them up in the way they want to go for 64 years, which is 3 generations, and produce a whole 3 generations of docile slaves, then you have a mindset that you can work with. And that mindset has been passed on. And it took the intervention of several individuals who by nature and by divine design come up out of the group that was made to be permanent slaves. And there's an article in the Message to the Black Man that talks about a gentleman, Mr. Berry, in the Virginia House of Commons, who said that they had cut off all avenues by which light may enter the mind of the slave, the so-called Negro. And he said, if they were able to cut off our capacity to see the light, then we would have a perpetual future of really heaven, with black people being docile forever. But light always comes up out of us, even if it don't come to us from the outside. So our ancestors had Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, Sojourner Truth, countless others. I read a few articles earlier today about slave revolts. Our ancestors had Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who inspired slave revolts in Louisiana after they were able to defeat the French in what they call Haiti. But my point is, we are our ancestors. And if we know the history, we would never disrespect our ancestors. Yes, the fear that was nursed into us, it needs to go. Because ain't nothing more disturbing than a scared to death so-called Negro. I can agree with that. But you can't disrespect those who had a defense mechanism put in them in order to produce the time and circumstances that allows for us today, if we are that, to be fearless. And our ancestors, with all that they had against them, were able to come up out of slavery, produce and build towns, build economy, build banks, open businesses, do all these things, fight against the oppressor. And here we are. This is what little to no education. And here we are, educated, got modern technology, and we have very little discipline to do anything in an organized, constructive way to overthrow our oppressor. So those are my thoughts, and I wanted to just read a few things that are African proverbs about our ancestors, because we should not disrespect our ancestors. And many of us have loved ones that have gone on, our fathers, our grandfathers, our grandparents. These are ancestors. We are our ancestors. And what we want to do is improve and take the torch and run our leg of the race. See? Because if our ancestors had all been of the mindset to live or die free, which is the natural order of things, and they fought every person, every slave master tooth and nail based on the numbers and the disadvantageous position, many of us would have never been born, because our ancestors would have been slaughtered. Many of them fought on the slave ships. Some of them jumped overboard, from the famous quote that the brother in the Black Panther stated about jumping over rather than being a slave. And that's a mindset that is valid. But also, we got to look at things, as I said earlier, from a divine perspective. And why did this happen? Why did God allow it to happen? And now, what is our job, our role in this day and time, to carry on and show that we are the equal of our ancestors, not better. Not better. I was thinking about this earlier today. Our ancestors didn't allow for murder and crime in the black community to be out of control, ravaging our neighborhoods. See, we too quick, because we get the picture of maybe the civil rights marches, and I read some people today that have promoted this statement. I couldn't have had no water hoses and dogs put on me. I feel you. I feel the same way. Don't disrespect the approach and effort, though I may not agree with it. They were fighting what they thought was the best means in order to achieve freedom. And the reality is, if we say we're not our ancestors, we're not Nat Turner, we're not Gabriel Prosser, we're not Sojourner Truth, we're not Malcolm X, we're not the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we're not the Black Panthers, we're not Assata Shakur, we're not Sojourner Truth, we're not all these great ones. That's who we're not them. And many of us, we're not them. They showed greater courage in some instances and laid the foundation. So, you know, for us to disrespect our ancestors is part of the, you know, the misunderstanding and the lack of understanding and the misperception of our history. And that's why knowing our history is so important, because if we know our history and understand it in a broad sense, we wouldn't make such statements. We would show the kind of respect and honor due to our ancestors, because where will we be without them? So I want to read a couple quotes, African proverbs, if you will, about ancestors, and just to put it out there. And I'm still trying to get us to see all our comments up here. But let me just read a few that I jotted down here. One quote that was a African proverb says, "Don't underestimate the wisdom of our ancestors." Another one says, "Remember your ancestors because you are not better than them." To neglect our ancestors would bring ill fortune and failure in our life. That's right. Nipsey Hussle. See, we think of ancestors as, you know, some ancient people, but everybody goes on before us is an ancestor. Do you think that the younger generation doesn't understand exactly what is going on due to a lack of education of our history? Yes. Yes, Andre, it's definitely a lack of understanding of our history. And then it's also a representation of our history too. See, where we learn our history from and how we gather it will determine how we view, you know, how we see our ancestors. You know, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad called the white man the colored man. And he called him the colored man because he colors reality. He paints history, and that's why we call it his story. He paints current events. He colors them so that you view it the way he wants you to see it. Just like when you take a page in a coloring book, you can make it what you want it to be. So when we take our history or our coloring, our viewpoint from his mind, then he's going to paint it in a way. So it's important that we teach our young people, that we teach our children, and that we educate ourselves through sources that have a more balanced and a more truthful expression or account of our history. So when we misunderstand, you know, we will have a lack of respect. But it's also the spirit of our young people. See, you know, one thing, and there's a purposeful divide produced between the youth and the elders today. They want our young people disconnected from the elders. The old statement says, young men for war, old men for counsel. And we saw with, I think it was Ferguson several years ago, a lot of disrespect shown to Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and others who are traditional civil rights leaders. And like I started off saying, I can understand from a perspective, but regardless of what you think of Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, or any other leaders, Minister Farrakhan, and any other leader, these men have been on the battlefield trying to gain advancement for our people and have gotten advancement, though they have not brought about the freedom, in particular the civil rights movement, that we may desire. It still is not a reason for us to show outwardly disrespect for our elders, and certainly not for our ancestors. But one thing, my leader, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, never condemns the youth, no matter what condition they are in. And he has caught slack from many people because he will be around a young thug and tell young thug he's greater than he is. He can be around the so-called hip-hop generation and the brothers and sisters and so-called gangs, and he's never condemning of them. Though he speaks against behavior that may be detrimental to our community, he always looks at the individual and understands their condition. And he works to bring them up out of that condition with knowledge and wisdom. So we that, and I'm in the middle. They say 50, 52, middle age. I know I'm an old head to many, but it's something that we have to take the mantle to try to bridge the gap. And unfortunately, too many of us are condemning of our young people without trying to understand, where they're coming from. So even though this statement infuriates me to some degree, I understand the perspective they're coming from, because this generation is not made to cow down in fear, but this generation more than anything needs guidance, because they have the warrior spirit, but unfortunately the enemy still got the minds of our youth, and they fighting and killing one another. They looking at their ancestors or their elders in a disrespectful manner. And it's unfortunately allowing for the enemy to continue to use our young people against themselves and help them to further their plan to fill their prisons, to fill the morgues in the cemeteries, and to keep going in a way that'll bring us down with them, because they know their nation is unraveling. So another quote, what I started to say, to neglect one's ancestors would bring ill fortune and failure in life. Another one is, no man can outwit the ancestors. Another one is, if you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it is part of a tree. Another quote I have from my sister, Maya Angelou. Our ancestors took the lash, the branding iron, the humiliations, and the oppression, because one day they believed you would come along to flesh out the dream, Many people that suffered dreamed, prayed, and wished for the great ones that would liberate and bring our people all the freedom that we desire. True freedom, a full and complete freedom. So Maya Angelou, in her quote, it says, your ancestors took the lash, took the branding. Now, some of us, we brand ourselves, we're in the fraternities and organizations. We get the brand on there. We branding ourselves, Brother Nori, our great brother out of Indianapolis, always talks about how the slave master whipped us. He branded us, and he did all these things. Now we riding around in what we call a whip. We branding ourselves. Not forget he had us in chains. Now we walking around with the chains. So psychologically, we still latched and locked up. But we are ancestors, and we have to build and stand on what our ancestors were able to do and understand. You can't judge a man, the Native Americans say, unless you walk in their moccasins. And we can talk what we would have done and what we wouldn't have did and put up with. And most of us are sincere in that spirit, but we faced with a lot today. We faced with police officers beating, killing, abusing our young girls, beating us, shooting us, killing us. But we so disconnected. If it's not me personally, maybe I don't have the same spirit, though you see it coming up in our people with the uprisings and what they call rioting over George Floyd and others. But we have to be mindful. We have to be careful not to judge those who went before us, because we don't know what we would have done. Another quote I have here says, "We are the grandchildren of the slaves you couldn't kill." That's what I was saying earlier. You know, everybody just would have stood up and fought in a literal sense. I believe God would have protected us eventually, but so many would have died that we would never have the numbers and the people we have today. But there comes a time where, of course, death is sweeter than living the life of oppression. The Holy Quran says like this: persecution is worse than slaughter. So I understand the spirit. And one of the reasons they wanted to keep Islam from among the slaves, and they purposefully kept it out from among our people. They didn't want no religion, no reading, no nothing. But eventually they allowed and taught some of our people to be Christians in a docile way. But Nat Turner wasn't that kind of Christian. He took the Bible and read it and understood it from a liberation sense. But one of the things the enemy hates, and there's documentation of this, that they knew that Islam brings out the military propensity in the black man. And in their exploration into Africa and trying to conquer Africa, they found the most difficult ones to conquer in many instances were those that were Muslims. So they purposely wanted to keep it out. Then they want to make it what they want it to be. They don't want you to be true followers of Christ, because Christ was a warrior. He wasn't no docile, even though they highlight verses from the Bible to what? Turn the other cheek, do this, do that, to make a docile slave. So it's important for us to know the history for sure. The other quote I want to read as we get ready to wind down and close out our program, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has a quote that we often repeat in the Nation of Islam, and it deals with history. And he says, "History is above all our studies. It is most attractive and best qualified to reward our research." Now, I know coming up in school, I hated history. History was boring, right? Most of us think history is boring because we're learning his story. But when you start studying history, even his history, from a perspective of an enlightened mind, you can learn from it. But oftentimes we get the song and dance colored view of his story. George Washington never told a lie. This one was a great one. That was, we can understand why we bored with that. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when you really study history, above all our studies, it's most attractive and best qualified to reward our research because it develops the springs and motives of human actions and displays the consequence of circumstances which operate most powerfully on the destinies of the human being. See, when you really know who you are through your ancestry, when you really understand the root of who you are, then you know yourself and you can be yourself. And we in the Nation of Islam, everything we teach can be summed up in 6 words: accept your own and be yourself. But you can't accept your own if you don't know what your own is. You can't be yourself if you don't know what yourself is. And we absolutely can't continue to buy into the lies and the half truth. That's why, it's really criminal for us to just let our enemy educate our children. And not only do we put them in their schools, then we take a hands-off approach, a disinterested approach. You know, I can understand where we may not have many choices or options at all. So they got to go to a public school, but you should at least, and we should at least be engaged in knowing what they're being taught. And right now, with all the online Zoom classes, my wife was saying, you know, my grandson is over our house a lot. And she's like, I get to listen in to see what the teachers are saying, what they're covering, because you got to deprogram your child when they come home from school. What did you learn today? What did y'all talk about in class? See, because you can't just assume that the teacher has your best interest in heart. And even if they got the best interest, they're coming from a curriculum that's designed against the very mind of your and my child. So we got to take the manner of educating our children, whether it's deprogramming them when they get home, reprogramming them with our own teaching of history, giving them books and things to read and study that will give them proper perspective of themselves. See, these type of things can outstrip what the enemy tries to do in this miseducation. But if we just turn them over and don't even, you know, we just get mad at them if they fail in school, a lot of our children get bored. I'm watching my grandson. Now, because of their educational system, you got to be a certain age to start school. But see, my grandson and even my children and other grandchildren, put them in school at an early age. Because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, by the time you're 6 years old, you should know what you want to do in life if you're properly educated. You should be able to finish all the schooling of this world by 16 years old. But because they set it up, you got to be 5 at a certain date in order to start getting. So my grandson is 6. He's in 1st grade. But I mean, he was in school learning what he's learning now at 3 and 4 years old. So now we got to give him something. My wife brought him a 2 2nd grade book and some other things to try to keep him occupied, because he's sitting there with all the other children in his class, like they struggling to do things. And he's sitting there like, man, you know, because we started him off in our Muslim school educations, that unfortunately they weren't able to stay open to this point. God willing, it'll be back open. But he was already reading and doing things before he went to kindergarten, because that's the brilliance of the human mind. You don't have to wait till they 5. Where did that come from? See, but we have to take the mantle as parents, as grandparents, and as a community to really re-educate and reprogram our children. You know, we are our ancestors, and we want to build and fulfill the vision, dreams, and prayers of our ancestors. Don't look down on, I don't care if you disagree with it. Dr. King was somebody that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who's my teacher, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan disagreed with vehemently. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, never disrespect a man. You can disagree with what he's doing and how he's doing it, and show why you find it to be ineffective, or there may be a better way, but you still don't belittle or disrespect the man or the woman who's trying to achieve a goal, because the ultimate goal was freedom, justice, and equality. And because maybe he had a different methodology doesn't mean you necessarily have to disrespect the person. You can disagree with the method. And our ancestors served a purpose. It brings us to where we are today. So as I started to say earlier, we got the baton. They ran their leg of the race. They ran their leg of the race. We got the baton in our hand now. Where we at? What we gonna do with it? See? And man, you know, the job that's been done on us is so thorough. In one hand, we may disrespect some of our ancestors. On the other hand, we can't honor and respect nobody but an ancestor. Because if somebody's living, our mind is programmed to find all their faults, as though all those that we may admire from yesterday had no faults. I did a subject in Baltimore and also in Chester last year why black people follow dead leaders. But every living leader, every living person that may be fighting for our freedom, you know, we sit back and we find every fault when we can. And then when they're dead and gone, you know, we'll start giving them flowers after they die. But you give flowers while they live. Because a dead person you can learn from, you can draw inspiration from, and you can study their life to give you motivation and guidance. But a dead person can't lead you. They can't lead you because they're gone. But you can certainly learn from them. And that's what we should do with our ancestors. But we should also respect those who are working today to try to turn it around, to try to make progress. We got to turn it around one mind at a time, as we say, Dre. You know, it's an uphill road. You know, this problem that we face is a 464-year problem. So a community is made up of what? Families. Families are made up of individuals. Cornerstone of family is marriage. The cornerstone of family is mother and father raising a child. The cornerstone of community is that family structure, because that's where we get our norms. That's where we get our culture from. That's where we get our shaping and molding. And then we got to go out here and work to change the minds, as we say here, one mind at a time. Start with mine, then I try to affect my family and loved ones, then I try to affect my community. And the way we affect our community is not necessarily preaching all the time, but we got to become better examples, because the circumstances of America, we talked about the unraveling, the circumstances of this world, our people are looking for a way out, just don't know one. We got to start those that have the mind. And my brother Michael, I forget his wife's name, young brother and sister, just brought over 22 acres of land up in Pennsylvania. Brother Kyle and Kimberly went up to visit. Brother Jabril and his wife went up to visit. We saw the story in the news, the 19 families that brought that land, 100 acres down there, down in Georgia. And she was motivated, the sister that spearheaded that effort, because she feared for her male relatives' lives. She wanted to build something where they could be safe. See, we got to take that kind of approach. I want to get some of this earth I can call my own. You know, 79th Ave been good to me. I've been there for a long time, but I want to get some land and be able to, and the brother Michael and I'm out there buying animals, trying to produce and farm. And everybody's not going to be a farmer, but we should own some land. You got to feed yourself. You got to educate yourself. We have to do things. And when you see examples, it will motivate our people. The minister went on a tour a few years back through the black colleges, and he really encouraged our young brothers and sisters who were in the institutions to take up agriculture, because everything we need is from the land. So it's an uphill climb, Dre. But you know, one thing we can't do is drop the baton. We may not see the finish line, because everybody that run a relay race don't cross the finish line, but whoever crosses the finish line, if they're on your team, they cross first, you win too. So our ancestors passed the baton to us. It's our leg of the race. This ain't no 4x100 relay. This is a marathon relay. So we got to run our leg, and God willing, we can be further down the line when we pass it on to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. But I truly believe that the circumstances and the unraveling of this nation, this world, I see God's hand on it. As the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on July 4th, go listen to his message called The Criterion. I mean, man, go listen to it. That's all I got to say, because he even mentioned President Trump and his current situation in his message. Go listen to July 4th, NOI.org. You don't have to be a Muslim. Listen, weigh it for yourself, because We can't, if we're believing men and women, take God out of the equation. See, a lot of us, we pay lip service to God. But I always ask the question, is God dead? No, of course, he's the ever living. So if he's the ever living, and yesterday, many of us believe he intervened when things got haywire, why would he not do something today? And if he's doing something, how will we recognize it? Yesterday, when we read the scriptures, the people that were there doing in the name of God were never believed. Oh man, I know you. Noah, you ain't no prophet. I knew you. Look, man, Moses, you killed a man. You just a tyrant over the people. They accused Jesus of being everything but a child of God, right? And they say it's hard to see the forest for the trees. And because we live, and I talked about it a few moments ago, where we don't give the respect to the living because we always fault fighting, then we may be walking. What does the Bible say? Be careful how you entertain strangers. Why? Because you could be entertaining angels and be unaware. God works through men and women, not a mystery, spooky way. When he wants his will done, he raises up men and women from among the people to serve as his instruments. And ultimately, when things get to a certain level, he brings down his judgment on that nation, on that people, or on that world. So, brothers and sisters, our greatest ancestor is God himself. Our greatest ancestor, the root of us all, is God. So we not our ancestor in that sense. I want to be a child of God. I want to be, the Bible says, ye are all but God's children of the Most High God. We are the descendants of great rulers we never knew. That's why it's good to know your history. That's why they making millions on Ancestry.com, because we want to know where we come from. Because somebody cut us off from that history. So, brothers and sisters, I understand the spirit, but let's not take that approach. We are ancestors, and we want to make our ancestors proud. We want to take and cross the finish line for our ancestors. We want to be free, justified, and equal. We want to build something to make our ancestors proud. I mean, they did a Montgomery bus boycott for like a year. Some of us put out a boycott for Gucci. We put out a boycott for this store, that store. We can't stay out of it past Black Friday. See? Sometimes, you know, we can make assessments thinking from one perspective, but we sitting right in a reality that if we really, from the perspective we judging our ancestors on, if we take that same prism and put it on ourselves, we'll see we're falling way short in many cases of what they were able and willing to do. Even from the perspective of working and sacrificing for your family and your children. You know, the minister in his great book, I thought I had it here. Oh, it's up under the thing. Torchlight for America. He talks about how America suffers from an inordinate self-interest, where everything is about me. See, and with social media and all these platforms, I mean, we really, being an ego-starved people in many cases, with so low self-esteem, we got a medium now to boost ourselves up in an artificial way in many cases. Or our whole world is centered around us. And that's why it's important, you know, and I'm not going to get into this now, but family and children and loved ones help you to expand. The Quran talks about expanding my breast, because no matter how many children you have as a mother, as a father, you feel like I could never love a child like this child. And then you get another one, and another one, and another one. What happens? You have the capacity to love each of those children to the fullest extent possible. And what that does, it makes you think beyond yourself, right? And we got to get beyond just our family. We got to think for the whole of our people. We start with self and family first. That's just natural, self-preservation. But we can't be self-centered, and we can't be selfish, and we can't be, and have an inordinate self-interest where everything is about me. And if I got mine, you got to get yours. I ain't worried about you. So, brothers and sisters, we are ancestors, and we should strive to live up to the great ones. You may not have the admiration for all of them to the same degree, but you should have the respect for all of them. And the ones you admire, take those traits and see if you can implement them. See who the next Toussaint Louverture is, the next Nat Turner, Malcolm X, whoever you admire. What are the principles they live by? See if you can emulate those principles. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, good brother. I wish you could have been on, give your insight on this this subject, because it's something I see online a lot. And, I don't get into the online Twitter, Facebook back and forth, but my wife and our conversation spurred me to take up this subject for tonight, because it's important that we understand this perspective. So thank you again, brother. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with you. When we see ourselves, right? Sometimes it's deeper than we see ourselves. We see our grandfathers, we see our fathers, we see our great grandfathers, and I got a phone call a couple days ago about the article about the DA job, right? And it was like, your father would have been proud of you, right? And to hear someone say that knew my father, right? It just emboldened me even more. So when we look back on our ancestors, right, or we think about where we came from, or what we strive to be, I think we're all a family. So when you look back and you say Malcolm X is something, that the way he lived, that's a way that I want to live, right? And I extremely appreciate, right, you bringing that topic up. So I love it.
Praise to Allah, yes, sir. And that's important. When you just said that, it made me think. The ancestors, your father, your grandfather, whoever, even though you knew their flaws and things of that nature, you have that respect and admiration for them. And that's where, as my nephew mentioned, knowing our history is so important. Because if you don't know your ancestors, then there's a greater chance you may show that disrespect because of your misperception or the coloring or painting that you have of them from somebody else. That's why reading histories and biographies are important, because you get to see, even with current people, like a lot of these people that are famous today, you may feel like, man, that joker, this one, that one, but you read their story. Somebody like Tyler Perry, Steve Harvey, who you may not agree with or like this or that, but when you see where they come from and what things they went through, you can appreciate, what I mean, the kind of struggle and the things they overcame to be where they are. You may not agree with all the things they've done to get there or what they're doing once they get there, but man, you got to have some respect when you see a man come from nothing. Homelessness, being in a car, this and that, molestation, whatever it may be, and then become a giant in a certain field. So history is best qualified to reward our research. So thank you all for tuning in and listening. May God bless us to continue to grow mentally, morally, spiritually. And let's take that study of history. Find a biography, find a book, find a historical account of some individual you've heard about. Learn about, some of the great ones. We talk about all these generals and stuff. Learn about Hannibal. Learn about some of the great ones who were warriors. and my brother being from Haiti, the great revolution that took place there. Learn about that, because it's inspiring, it's motivating. So with that, brothers and sisters, let's keep working to change the world one mind at a time. May God bless us all. God willing, next week we'll be back on Respect for Life Hour. With that, we're signing off. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.